I'm not sure any of it was ever really serious. If you go back to that memorandum of understanding, that was effectively an agreement that gave the Iranians virtually everything they wanted. I wouldn't call it a surrender document. I would simply say what they fought the war for is what they get. We, on the other hand, were not necessarily going to profit in any particular way. In other words, we saw no strategic gain from it. At least Donald Trump didn't. And, he's one of these people that keeps talking about you've got to open the strait, open the strait. He fails to point out that the strait was open until we attacked Iran. So let's get the strait open, Donald. I agree with you. And let's not worry so much about the rest of the stuff. But unfortunately, he's not a free agent. So point number one is the Iranians do not trust Donald Trump. They have no confidence in anything he says. Secondly, international investors. We're talking about people that are in the business of financing things like refineries, oil infrastructure, mining, and so forth. They have no confidence in Trump's ability to reestablish stability in the region. They see the Middle East as a place where they will not invest or lend money until they're absolutely certain that there will be no more war. So when he talks about, well, we're going to have this agreement and it's going to be so good and we're going to win and after we win, everything's going to be better, nobody believes that. So you're not going to see any oil or gas infrastructure rebuilt until, I would argue, the United States and Donald Trump are effectively marginalized or completely out of it. Trump represents instability right now. Investors and leaders believe Trump will ensure endless destruction from endless wars, and that means, if you're in finance and business, endless losses for financiers and investors. Now, the situation today is much worse than it was when he signed the Memorandum of Understanding. The continuation of the war as he's waging it right now, which is escalating, is going to lead to oil price increases, something which he's been able to suppress by manipulating the markets and Wall Street. So I think in a couple of months, we're looking at $150 a barrel, and it could go much higher. This means that we're also looking at a massive global downturn, which the United States, given its incredible debt, may not recover from for 20 years. So I think from your standpoint, from people in Canada who invest and want to know where is the market going to go and what's going to happen, what will or won't work, I think those are pretty grim points, but I think they're the truth. This is not the first time in American history we've been through this. A lot of people today do not realize that Americans in overwhelming numbers opposed our entry into World War I. That was a very difficult problem for Woodrow Wilson and his friends in the banking system to drag us into that war. He managed to do it, obviously, and we had a similar problem at the end of the war. He kept saying, well, we won. And people said, well, how is it that we won? What did we win? And his argument was, we're making the world safe for democracy. And it was complete nonsense. And we lost 1,000 dead in every battle that we fought in. We only fought for 110 days. So imagine that, 1,000 dead in each battle. By the way, we did not tell Americans at home how many men we were losing as we lost them. We slow rolled it. By the time the war ended, we had 318,000 casualties and 110,000 dead. We did not advertise that. And there were a lot of unhappy people. And people said, what did we win? Well, we defeated Germany, all right. So what's that mean? Well, Germany's now a democracy. We created all these little states all over Europe. They're all democracies. And what about the Soviet Union and Bolshevism? Well, that'll work out. We've been down this road before. Now, this time, I think Donald Trump's in the worst of all possible positions. He started the war and said, we've got to effect regime change. We got to have a new government that will work with us. Okay, that failed. And people said, well, if that failed, what are you going to do? Well, we can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. Okay, so what are you going to do? Well, we're going to bomb. How's that gone? Well, that hasn't worked. Well, what are you going to do now? Well, I'm going to destroy Iran. Remember the statement, civilization gone in a night. Only a complete lunatic would make such a statement. Now, where are we? Well, suddenly it's all about the Gulf. Got to reopen the Gulf, reopen the Gulf, reopen the Gulf. Well, it's not going very well. You sign this MOU and you say they broke the MOU. In reality, they didn't do anything they said they wouldn't. They were going to control the Gulf and they were going to tell people where they had to move. We tried to circumvent that and move them through a different corridor. That provoked the Iranians. But I think the real goal was to get the war started again, because the real goal at this point is to destroy Iran. You want to so completely weaken the government, the central government, and the society that Iran breaks up into smaller fragments or pieces. This has always been the Western goal in Ukraine against Russia. Ukrainians are people we just use like tissue on the battlefield. They're the cannon fodder. And we keep providing them with whatever we think that we can get them that creates the illusion they're still alive out there. And they managed to do some serious damage. They reduced the refining capacity, at least temporarily, by about 38% through some of their unmanned strikes. Hasn't changed the war, doesn't make any difference on the battlefield, but, it creates the illusion of something in the hopes that more people will throw money away on war with Russia. So that war has failed. Well, the same goals are now in effect with Iran. So you had to get the war started. We found a way to do it. We blame them for breaking the MOU. You have to remember, in the United States, you have, I would say, at least 25 to 30% of the population is willing to believe anything you say that is bad about not just Iran, but Islam in general and Muslims in general. So that's helpful to the administration. But the people who are really behind all of this are people who support what we call the Israel lobby. And the most prominent members are these Zionist Jewish billionaires, some group of them, enormous quantities of money with which, over the years, they have been able to purchase the United States government for use. Now, what about the rest of the population that doesn't fall into that almost 30% that I mentioned? Well, they don't want anything to do with the war in the Gulf. They're opposed to it. And I think if you look at the polling data that comes through, the last time I looked, it was something like 73% of Americans questioned said we should be out of the Gulf. Well, more than that opposed World War I. Didn't make any difference. We were still dragged into the war. Right now, simply because most Americans don't think we should be involved in the Gulf, doesn't make any difference. Why not? Because the people paying for everything are the billionaires that support the Israel lobby. And the Israel lobby wants one thing: the destruction, dismemberment of Iran, because they're in the business of establishing the supremacy and hegemony of the Jewish state over everyone and everything in the region. They are linked to enormously powerful financial interests that want to take over the resources. Just as they wanted to take over the resources that are now sitting under Russian control in eastern Ukraine, they want to take over the resources, the oil fields and so forth, that Iran possesses. They've effectively humbled the Arabs and beaten them down to the point where the Arabs will do almost anything they tell them to do. So the last man standing in the region at the moment is Iran. Now, there's another major player that could be just as challenging, if not even more so, than Iran, and that's Turkey. The Turks are an immensely powerful state, but their leader has chosen to straddle the fence in an effort to benefit in terms of territorial expansion and financial strength from all sides. How long will that go on is anybody's guess. I suspect at some point that will end and they will turn on the Israelis. But right now, Iran is staying the course. It's maintaining its sovereignty, its independence against us and Israel. And we are really muscle for the Israeli program. You remember all these mafia movies? They'd say, well, come on, Tony, we know you're not really muscle. You're not one of the muscle guys, so talk to us, okay? We're the muscle. The question is, how long can we do this? Well, we've got two big problems. I talked about one of them at the beginning here, the financial issue. We've printed about all the money we can. If you look at our bond market, our 10-year, which is usually seen as the bellwether of serious crises, most experts in the bond markets say that if we hit 5% in the 10-year bond, our entire financial structure will collapse. So that's one constraint. Second constraint, we only have so many missiles and we're running out. And we can't manufacture them fast enough to keep up with the demand for the war. The Iranians, on the other hand, they've put everything into manufacturing, they've put it underground, and they can turn out missiles and unmanned systems at a much higher rate, much greater speed than we can. And behind them stand preeminently China and Russia. China is heavily invested in Iran. It buys most of Iran's oil. In addition to that, though, Iran is a key player in the Chinese Belt and Road. This is the structure of transportation and commerce the Chinese and the Russians have collaborated on across Central Asia so that you would be able to effectively move goods from Shanghai overland all the way to Rochefort on the west coast of France, and then from there to the United States or anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere, and do it very quickly and less expensively. So they're invested there, but they also see something else. Remember, we have imprudently threatened the Chinese on numerous occasions, especially about Taiwan, and the Chinese are not interested in that. We have the Shanghai Communique, which we signed in 1973, that said Taiwan is part of China. End of story. And everybody's accepted that until we got to Joe Biden and now Donald Trump. So the Chinese are saying, well, there's no interest on our part or incentive on our part to try and broker a quote unquote deal with the United States. if that means the United States turns around and tries to attack us. And the good news for the Chinese that all of the technology that they would rely on in a war against us is performing brilliantly against us in Iran. So you put all of this together, it's a pretty grim picture right now. We're not going to win anything. And I think asking that question right up front is key. What the hell are we winning? And nobody can really tell you that. Well, we're making Israel great again. I mean, that's some people will laugh and say that.